How could you, Daniel, doing such a thing while your wife is sleeping next to you? But my wife is so dominant and never treats me well. You're much better, incredibly right there, Daniel. And a young woman were in the midst of an affair. It seems they didn't notice I had woken up. I hurriedly dove under the covers. I covered my mouth with both hands to keep from making a noise. Grandmother, her eldest daughter, and Mary looked stern. Grandmother, Aunt Mary, as I looked bewildered, Grandmother said to me with a smile, "Jessica, help me discipline that fool. He hurt Jessica during a trip I gifted, and I'll never forgive him." Though she smiled, her voice was filled with immense anger. I am Jessica Smith, a 44-year-old housewife married to Daniel of the wealthy Smith family. It's been almost 20 years since our marriage. The child-rearing phase is over, and I finally started to have some time for myself. I'm technically a housewife, but I've also been selling on an online marketplace for a few years. Initially, I started by listing unwanted items, but eventually, I began purchasing and reselling items. The online marketplace was easy to venture into, since no physical store was needed. I enjoy figuring out how much a product can sell for, and what kind of photos and descriptions make it sell. Being part of a wealthy family, the Smith family has a large house with many rooms. The head of the family and his direct relatives live in this big house, so it's quite a large household. I got permission from Grandmother and converted one of the spacious rooms into a sales room. I stock inventory and materials in this sales room and do the packaging work there. My husband, Daniel, works as a company employee, but to be honest, he's unreliable, indecisive, and always hiding behind me in crucial moments. He avoids competition with others, so his salary isn't that high. Frankly, the profit from my online sales often exceeds Daniel's salary. Every time I see Daniel's pay slip, I wonder if there's any point in staying with him. Grandmother, excuse me. It's been a hot day. How are you feeling? I visited Grandmother's room. She's not my biological grandmother, but rather the grandmother of Daniel, my husband. She is the head of a wealthy, esteemed family, but Grandmother is not a stiff person. She kindly allows me, her son's wife, to call her grandmother. Of course, she's the most respected person in the house, so I never forget to speak politely. Thank you always, Jessica. Since my son and his wife are no longer here, I have no choice but to rely on you, Jessica. I'm sorry. My parents-in-law have already passed away. They both fell ill shortly after we got married. I desperately continued to care for my parents-in-law and grandmother. During the funeral of my parents-in-law, I managed everything under Grandmother's direction. However, Daniel just hid behind me and did nothing. He didn't even step forward at his own parents' funeral. Daniel, at least you could greet the attendees. Jessica is handling everything from the paperwork to the arrangements. Grandmother, who had outlived her child, looked exhausted and admonished Daniel. But Daniel just hid behind me and refused. No way. Jessica is handling it, so let her do it. I don't want to be in front greeting people or managing the funeral. A grown man acting childishly? It's just pathetic. I thought his shyness was cute before marriage, but now I regret it. He wasn't shy. He just avoided trouble. Well, we have a child and Grandmother is kind. As long as no major life events happen, it should be fine. It's pointless to expect change now. In a way, Daniel is perfect as he lets me do what I want. He said nothing when I started the online marketplace business. Now this online marketplace venture is a big hit, and I'm busy moving around the house during the day. Jessica, how's the sales business going? I saw a lot of new stock arrived recently. Thanks to Grandmother's permission to use a large room, I can work efficiently. Sales are steadily increasing, and I'm very grateful. Grandmother believes even women should acquire means to live. That's her philosophy as the head of a wealthy family. So when I started the sales business, she gave me various advice. Jessica, you're so proactive and quick. I wish Daniel would learn a bit from you. Because her own grandson is unreliable, Grandmother often mutters such things. Then one day, Grandmother fell ill. She lost her appetite, and her complexion was poor. Her voice lacked its usual firmness. I hurriedly arranged for a doctor. It seemed her strength had been sapped by the events of the past few years. She was advised to eat nutritious meals and rest comfortably in her room. It's pathetic, isn't it? I used to do farm work under the scorching summer sun when I was younger. Grandmother sighed as she lay in bed. Well, No offense, but the summer temperatures have been rising year after year. Even for grandmother. And it's dangerous to be active under the scorching sun. I smiled as I cared for grandmother. Honestly, I was relieved it wasn't a serious illness. While I was worried about grandmother's health this time, to talk leisurely was precious. In the midst of our conversation, grandmother suddenly made a suggestion. Jessica, why don't you and Daniel go to a resort? There's a resort hotel I've been going to for a long time with a wonderful spa. Oh, that's a very kind offer. But what about grandmother? If it's just for 3 days, I can have my daughter or another grandchild come. You're always taking care of me, so take some time to relax. Daniel would never bring up such a thing anyway. Thus, a spontaneous overnight trip for the two of us was decided. It had been years since we went on a trip as a couple. I was inadvertently excited. The resort hotel arranged by grandmother was splendid. I thought I saw a female employee at the hotel entrance glancing at Daniel. Well, maybe it was just my imagination. The scenery, the spa, the meals, everything was a break from the ordinary. It was a wonderful hotel that felt refreshingly new to me. Having been busy with child-rearing grandmother, thank you. I spontaneously thanked grandmother, and then I spoke to Daniel. Don't you think it's a wonderful hotel? I never thought we'd come here together. Yeah, it's a nice hotel. It was a typical response from him, yet I felt something off about Daniel's reply. It was unusual for him to express his thoughts so clearly. Normally, he would grumble something evasive, like, rather than that, and for some reason, he seemed overly cheerful with a sly smile on his face. Hey, that's strange. As I tried to speak to Daniel, I was suddenly struck with dizziness. I hadn't even drunk any alcohol. I collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. How much time had passed? I woke up suddenly. My head felt unusually heavy. I had a headache when I tried to move. As I attempted to sit up, I realized something horrendous. There, next to me, Daniel and a young woman were in the midst of an affair. They seemed unaware that I had woken up. I quickly dove back under the covers, covering my mouth with my hands to remain silent. Why is he doing this to me while I'm asleep? And who is that woman anyway? I asked myself these questions in a voiceless whisper. Staying quiet under the bed covers, I gradually calmed down. That woman. She was the hotel employee who had been eyeing Daniel when we arrived. My feeling that she was looking at Daniel wasn't just my imagination. What does this mean? Had they been having an affair all this time? No, this trip was a sudden plan proposed by grandmother. It seemed unlikely that this was a mere coincidence. Fortunately, my mobile phone was within reach. I carefully took it from the bed and recorded the scene of the ongoing affair. I had to maintain a position that wouldn't arouse suspicion from the two. Peeking out only the top of my head from under the covers, I plugged my ears and waited for the time to pass. Eventually, the two moved to the bathroom in the room. I crawled out from under the covers, enduring the headache. This headache wasn't due to illness. Something must have been put in my dinner or drink. Struggling with the pain, I crawled toward the shower. How could you, Daniel, doing such a thing while your wife is sleeping next to you? But my wife is so dominant and doesn't make me look good. You're much better. I could hear their disgustingly sweet voices from the bathroom. I quickly packed my belongings. I didn't want to stay here any longer. I couldn't forgive Daniel or the woman. Then I noticed clothes and towels carelessly dropped on the floor. That's when I had an idea. I carefully reached out, silently grabbing the clothes and towels. I stuffed Daniel's change of clothes, bathrobe, the women's clothes, and all the towels into a bag. When I stood up in the hallway, my head throbbed unbearably. Unable to endure it, I collapsed in the hallway. A hotel employee noticed me crouching in my bathrobe with my luggage and quickly came to help. I explained the situation while enduring the headache. The employee turned pale. The woman's clothes left in our room were hotel uniforms. She was involved with a guest while on duty. When I handed the uniform to the employee, something fell out. It was a capsule of medication. The label indicated it was a prescription sleeping pill. Was this what they had given me? How could they do such a thing, drugging me with sleeping pills? I requested to contact my home where grandmother was waiting. I had to leave before those two came out of the shower. Fighting the headache and drowsiness, I eventually fell asleep again. I fully awoke in the early hours of the next day. Looking around, I was in my familiar bedroom. I hurriedly got up and went to the living room. The lights were on. "In the living room, Jessica, are you okay?" Daniel said. "You looked ill from being drugged, and I was worried. The doctor said you'd be fine after a night's sleep, but do you still feel sick or have a headache?" Grandmother had been waiting in the living room for me to wake up, despite not being fully well herself. "Grandmother, I'm sorry for worrying you. I didn't know what to do." Seeing Grandmother's face, I relaxed and started crying. I clung to her knees as she sat on the sofa and cried for a while. Was I upset about the affair? Sad or scared after realizing I'd been drugged secretly? I couldn't understand my own feelings. Tears kept flowing endlessly. There, you got a fright, didn't you? It's okay, you're safe here." Grandmother kept stroking my head as I continued to cry. After a while, I calmed down and finally looked up. Grandmother and Aunt Mary, her eldest daughter, looked stern. Aunt Mary had seen us off on our trip, saying she would care for Grandmother, but she ended up having to pick me up after I'd been drugged and fallen asleep. "I'm really sorry for all the trouble, especially to Aunt Mary. The trip that was supposed to be special turned out like this." While I apologized, Grandmother murmured, "Since Jessica cleverly took away all of Daniel's clothes, they won't be able to leave the room. We can't let this opportunity pass. What should we do, Mary? Gather all the capable family members at the hotel." Aunt Mary immediately started making calls. I didn't understand what Grandmother and Aunt Mary were planning. Grandmother smiled at my bewildered expression. "Jessica, we're going to deal with that fool. He hurt you during the trip. I will never forgive him." Though she smiled, her voice was filled with immense anger. Meanwhile, Daniel and his affair partner were frozen in the room, completely naked. There were no clothes, not even a bath towel, to cover themselves. Plus, I, who was supposed to be asleep, had vanished with all the luggage. With no mobile phone, the only way to call for help was the hotel's internal phone. But how could they explain the situation to the front desk? "Why? Where did Jessica go? And my bathroom is gone too. No way, my clothes are gone too. We can't leave the room like this. Do something. How can I call someone in this situation and explain what's happening?" The two searched the room while completely naked, but couldn't even find a towel to cover themselves. "What do we do? What do we do?" As they crouched, holding their heads, the door suddenly opened. There stood the hotel manager with an extremely angry face and Aunt Mary with a cold expression. "Why are you here, please, manager? Don't look!" The woman screamed and tried to hide. However, the manager and Aunt Mary moved incredibly fast. They quickly wrapped the naked pair in bath towels, carried them out, and dumped them in the hall. In the hall, the Smith family and the hotel's senior staff were all seated. Daniel turned deathly pale. "Now then, both of you, would you care to explain what this is all about?" Her voice was low and unusually cold. "Grandmother, why are you here? Why are so many people gathered here? What are you planning to do with us?" I just watched the two of them causing a scene with an expressionless face. "At least let us put on clothes. Why do we have to be exposed like this?" In just towels, the woman still didn't seem to understand the situation she was in. "Hey there, energetic young lady. Is it a habit of yours to hit on hotel guests?" Grandmother's voice silenced the woman's fuss. "What are you talking about? An employee who dares to engage in acts next to a sleeping wife. Quite a bold move, isn't it, Daniel?" And the woman finally realized their affair had been exposed. Daniel and the woman, now just in bath towels, were made to sit formally on their knees in the hall. The woman's name was Sophie. She was a full-time female employee working here. But Sophie had a problematic habit. She would try to flirt with male guests she liked, even attempting to get their contact information just before they left. "Well, at least she doesn't steal contact information from the records, I suppose." "That's something," Grandmother muttered in exasperation. The hotel manager's face was twisted in distress. "What led to this happening?" When I glared at Sophie, she unapologetically responded, "Because this is a renowned luxury hotel, isn't it? Bringing a wife here means he's a big shot. I thought I could become a celebrity wife too by snatching him away, even if he's a bit older. At Sophie's words, grandmother, Aunt Mary, and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. This guy, a celebrity? What's so funny? Aunt Mary was crouching down, trying to suppress her laughter. Even grandmother couldn't stop laughing. Young lady, you targeted my foolish grandson thinking that, Daniel, you must have something to say to this misguided young lady. Daniel, shrinking in size, responded weakly, I'm just an ordinary employee. I'm just an ordinary employee. This trip was arranged by my grandmother. Wait a minute, I went through this embarrassment for just a regular employee? You must be joking. I'm leaving. Just as Sophie tried to stand up and change her attitude, grandmother's sharp voice rang out, Wait, Daniel? Sophie and I were all too shocked to move. Leaving Daniel aside, you secretly drugged Jessica. The doctor said it was quite a strong medicine and it could have sent Jessica to the hospital. How could you do such a thing? The hotel's executives grimaced at grandmother's words. Sophie shouted back defiantly, So what? It's just a strong sleeping pill. A single pill would only make her sleep for a while. Why is everyone making such a big deal? I don't understand. I admonish you, Sophie. Using sleeping pills without a doctor's prescription can cause brain damage. Luckily, I just slept it off mostly, but what you did could have caused serious harm. And if you had been stealing money or valuables, it would have been considered a serious crime. Do you realize how dangerous your actions were? Sophie turned her face away from me. It was sheer luck that I didn't suffer any problems. If word got out that a hotel employee was secretly drugging guests, it would be a major scandal. The manager held his head in his hands. Seeing this, grandmother stood up. Manager, in consideration of our past relationship, we'll keep this matter within the Smith family. However, please deal with this woman appropriately. Upon grandmother's words, the hotel senior staff deeply apologized. Now, Daniel, you're going home for your punishment. Be prepared. Overwhelmed by her authority, Daniel and Sophie trembled and just in their bath towels. Later, Daniel and I divorced. Do we really have to divorce? If I'm not around, how will you manage? Jessica earns more than you with her online sales. You betrayed the woman who supported you, and now you think you can say anything? Daniel was reluctant to divorce, but grandmother clearly stated it, and he was forcibly removed. I demanded compensation from Daniel and Sophie for the divorce. Daniel was ousted from the Smith family and had to pay the compensation from his modest salary, leading to his downfall. Thankfully, our child was already independent, so there were no child support issues. Angered by Daniel's actions, our child blocked his contact. Sophie, of course, had nothing to do with him anymore. Daniel was now alone. As for Sophie, she was, of course, fired from the hotel. Her reputation as a flirtatious employee with male guests spread, making it unlikely for her to find employment in the same industry. She angered the Smith family, and her actions became widely known, leaving her unemployable in local businesses. She had no choice but to drift away. Why me? All I wanted was to be a celebrity wife, and now this happens? Sophie's realization of her mistake seemed far off. I was allowed to stay with the Smith family and formally became grandmother's adoptive child. Jessica truly fits into our family line. I want you to carry the Smith name. Grandmother said so herself. The Smith family had amassed wealth through business and asset management. Many relatives were involved in business, so I continued my online sales, collaborating with them. My assistance with challenging internet tasks for the older relatives was greatly appreciated. I see. The world really does revolve around the internet, doesn't it? Yes. Everyone uses their mobile phones to find what they need and want. It's important to rely on the strength of the younger generation. Today, as always, I'm preparing shipments for my online sales, chatting with grandmother. I look forward to spending my days leisurely with the Smith family.